good.
Boom, 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 boom. How's the sound?
The sound is very good, man. It's luscious. I think it's good.
Is
I
it?
think you have a good
Okay.
bass end on that thing. Yeah, it's good.
Okay, that's very good.
Yeah, it's
I hope
nice.
I hope so.
Really,
And the
really.
echo is not as echoey anymore.
I am not hearing any echo. I mean, I'm hearing you through my laptop speakers, right? So I'm not kind of hearing. I'm not listening on anything fancy, but it seems
Yeah.
good.
Okay. That is nice.
It is nice. It is nice. But where is George?
Everybody in the world has to decide whether you stand on the side of the free world or you stand on the side of those who fight against the free world. Who fight against the free world. And we are standing here on the side of the free world. This is a moment of truth.
Hello, welcome to another episode of This Time Tomorrow. This is the podcast that brings together democracy defenders to understand how we can win out against autocracy. My name is Omri Price.
And I'm Benjamin Seep.
And today we have a special episode with a guest campaigner about something that is very much at the core of civic engagement, I think, for all of us, something that's a part of our lives, but maybe isn't directly to do with democracy as a concept itself, but something that we need to be doing as part of our democratic activity, which is really campaigning on key issues that matter to us. And that campaign is called Dad Shift. It's a UK-based campaign for paternity rights, so for paternal leave, that is, your rights as a dad, which has a major impact for, mom's rights as well, of course, and then for all of us as human beings, because we are either all, kids at some point, or parents at some point, or are just people at some point that are impacted by other people's kids. So I think this is really a topic that affects all of us. And what we really want to get into the meat on here is also what makes the campaign tick. Like what can we learn about activating people? And we'll bring in our guest and co-founder George in a minute. But maybe Benny, did I get that right? Like, what do we really want to get out of this episode, maybe, for our listeners?
No, I think you summarized this quite well. I mean, it's about how do you win, and I think the mechanics of this are always the same, no matter what specific topic you're looking at. So I think there's a lot we can learn from George in that regard. And there's then also, I mean, just the issue itself is super pertinent, because the question of how engaged you can be and how free you are as a citizen to actually move stuff and to actually get things going, of course, depends simply on the amount of time you have, the amount of economic freedom at your disposal, and if you're just constantly sort of running between the job and the crash, and making lunch and bringing kids to bed, and that's all your life consists of, then an active citizen you are not. So I think there's several layers to why this is super pertinent for us. And then I'm also looking forward to sort of actually looking at the situation in the UK. I just skimmed over this briefly and compared to what's going on in Germany, for example, where I'm based, and the differences seem quite stark. So it's also a bit of a just very basic question of if we're looking at Europe as a continent with a sort of a shared general culture, and we want to make sure that things are fair across borders as well in a more connected world. There should be some kind of minimum standards for these really important bits that really touch our daily lives. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more from George.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that all resonates. I think it's also extremely pertinent because we are all dads in this conversation. So it sort of
Indeed, we are.
relates to all of us in our daily life. And one of the major things about feminism and the history of women's rights is the point of, well, if you just throw all of the childcare and housework and all of that stuff on women, then they are not free citizens in the same way that you just mentioned. So that element of who has what rights in terms of being a parent is really important. And for me, this really operates at a few different levels. And then we'll bring George in because I think he'll kind of set us straight. But I mean, there is a level at which all of the autocracy out there and the populism and the nationalism really bundles up misogyny as well, and there is a lot of toxic masculinity there, which is really important to acknowledge and to tackle head on. And we've kind of we in this podcast, in previous episodes, we've kind of glided into the whole conversation on toxic masculinity and what sort of being a man in a healthy fashion looks like. And I think the Dad Shift campaign does that really, really nicely. So that's great to see. Then there is the whole mechanism of how do we activate people and how does the campaign work as a campaign. And then what we can learn from it to apply to other campaigns. So how about we, like, I can stop blabbering here and maybe bring in George. Hi, George. How are you?
Hey guys, I'm great. I'm really well today and very nice to be here with you.
Lovely. And where are you at the moment?
So I'm at home in Bow in East London. Nice. I've finished the nursery run with my two kiddos and now settling down to my day.
Awesome. So you're also an hour earlier than us, I guess. I'm sitting here in Brussels. So maybe could you just start us off, like, what is Dad Shift? What's the big idea? How did you get into it? What got you going?
For sure. So my day job is I work at a major tech company, and I think working close to social media, I became aware earlier than many others about this shift in male identities, which was really from millennials on down. You see men moving towards a more traditional masculine identity, and you see within that a real trend among a smaller cohort towards attitudes that are outright hostile to women. There's the kind of growing army of kind of men and masculinity influencers online who range from the kind of relatively benign and even helpful kind of people who are helping people learn how to kind of work out in a way that's like safer and more effective, through to really unhealthy voices like Andrew Tate. And I think I became more concerned earlier than many other people about that phenomenon. And particularly the way it was starting to bleed through into our politics, whether it's with the AfD in Germany, Trump in the US, Farage here in the UK. You see the alt and far right is increasingly powered by the votes of younger and working class men in particular. And so essentially I thought, basically the culture wars have had a lot of success in persuading men that the struggles they face are often the result of women, and particularly women's equality. And I wanted to find a way to call men back to gender equality in general. So the kind of hypothesis I arrived at was that maybe the way to call men back was to try and prove that equality is good for everyone. And the way to do that is to find an issue that is unambiguously pro-male, but also pro-equality, and see if you could campaign for it in male voice. Because if you can do that, on the one hand, perhaps you can help win, because you no longer leave these issues just to the women's sector to fight for on behalf of all of us. So you show up with some additional political and power resources. But also by campaigning in male voice, maybe you can take the microphone back from some of these dickheads and give an alternative portrayal of what it means to be a man in Britain today and in society at large that is compatible with gender equality. And so, that was really the hypothesis we set out to test. And then, I was trying to figure out, well, what's the issue? What's the issue? And then 2.5 years ago, my wife and I had a child. We had our daughter. And I'm very lucky. I got given 4 months of paternity leave, and because I had that time off, I just saw how unbelievably valuable it was. Both my wife, she had a C-section. 42% of births in the UK now happen by a C-section, for which doctors recommend a 6-week recovery window. So there's clearly part of this which is about supporting women through physical recovery. There's also lots of evidence to show that proper paternity leave is associated with lower levels of postpartum depression. So it's good in the short term for women's mental health, their physical health, and also their long-term economic prospects. We know that when you share the care at home more equally, women are kind of empowered to make different choices in the workplace. So it's good for women. It's clearly good for babies. There's lots of evidence that it's really important to their outcomes in education, their developmental progress, but also particularly actually around relationships, basically kids' relationships with themselves and one another. There's a really interesting study called 10 to Men in Australia, which studied 16,000 boys over a 10-year period and found the single factor that best predicts whether a boy grows into a man who is likely to abuse his partner is actually whether that boy reports having a good relationship with his dad. Often they say boys learn how to treat women through their relationships with their mum. And actually, no, it's much more that boys learn how to treat women from how the men in their lives are treating women. So it's good for mums, good for babies, but also for me, it was just really important as a father. In those early weeks when my daughter was screaming her head off, and I'd never held a baby before, really. I'd never changed one. I never fed one. I was wildly unprepared to take a child home after leaving hospital.
Everybody is.
Dude, it's crazy.
Universal.
Yeah, but I think there's also something. So I think everyone is, but I think particularly men are just there's no social onboarding to fatherhood, right? The idea that you wouldn't have changed a baby until it's your one and you're at home is proper insane. So anyway, it was only because I had a decent chunk of time that I could say, come on, man, figure this out. Get some help, ask some questions, don't be afraid to make mistakes. And as a result, I became a really confident and capable caregiver, and it became a real source of joy. And so while all of this was going on for me, I just saw all of my friends who were having to deal with our kind of terrible national paternity leave offer, which is just 2 weeks, less than half the minimum wage. You get nothing.
Yeah, maybe get into that in a bit more detail. What is the actual situation on the ground in the UK? Let's say you have your baby on a Monday.
What does your Tuesday look like?
Exactly. Yeah. So what is that? I mean, we know what your Tuesday looks like in terms of, oh, Jesus, I have this little, bundle of biological mass here and I need to try not to kill it. That's the same for everybody, I suppose. But in terms of what kind of, services you expect, how does your economic situation change? And then, maybe I can give a brief comparison to how this experience, what this looks like in Germany, for example.
So if you're employed, then you're eligible for 2 weeks leave where your employer has to keep your job. And so you're allowed to take 2 weeks off. But for those 2 weeks, you're only paid a kind of statutory rate of £184 per week. So that's less than half the minimum wage. So that's the basic offer to most dads. If you're self-employed, you work for yourself, you get absolutely nothing. So really what this means is dads can take a very small amount of leave for which they're paid very poorly. And our research at the Dad Shift shows that 90% of the leave that is claimed, of that 2 weeks that is claimed in the UK, is claimed by earners in the top half of the income distribution. So what this really proves is, it's only better off fathers and non-birthing parents who can afford to take even those 2 weeks out. So I think, just to cap it off, basically, I was having this very important time with my family. All my friends were being treated terribly. And that's when I connected with Alex, my co-founder on LinkedIn, and we were hey, let's do something about this, because it felt both important in its own right and an opportunity to test this hypothesis. Here's a campaign you can run that's good for men, good for equality, and you can run that campaign in male voice. So that's the Dad Shift as a project, really.
And what's the thing? I mean, I'm just curious about, how two people come together to actually decide to get a campaign off the ground, because, that's sort of the inspiration point and the trigger that actually takes it from an idea to a thing you actually end up doing. There's so many things in life that, I do a little rant about, and I feel like starting a campaign about. a lot of different things, but like then, busy life takes over. So what was it between you and Alex that really turned it into a real conversation and a real plan and actual action?
I mean, I think the big thing was finding each other. I posted on LinkedIn, hey, I think, this situation of terrible leave is bullshit and really bad for people, and I want to do something about it. And a friend, a mutual acquaintance, connected the two of us. It was like, oh, Alex is thinking about this too. So, yeah, we met up and we just hit it off. We had like very complementary skill sets. We have like similar values. We come at it from a different place. I'm very focused on this misogyny stuff and the connection to the far right. Alex is more focused on healthy relationships and equality inside his marriage. And yeah, we just really connected. And I think if you can find someone to do it with, both who brings extra time, energy, skills to the table, so in some like very practical ways, that's a big step. But the other thing is like just on an emotional level, right? Having someone you can like share the risk with, someone who, you're basically choosing to put your head above the parapet, and having someone who will do that with you is like a really big step, certainly for me, in terms of getting going. So yeah, I think finding your co-founder, certainly in the startup world, when you look at businesses, it's like one of the major pieces of advice to anyone starting a startup. It's like, find your co-founder. There are whole accelerators dedicated to just that purpose. And I think we underemphasize it in social change.
Right, that's really, really interesting. And then like tell us more about the campaign. So what are you guys actually doing? Like what's the meat and potatoes of the campaign?
Yeah, and what's the goal? Like where if this succeeds, where do you end up?
So policy-wise, the European average is 8 weeks at 100% pay. That's the average across Europe for new dads. So our baseline ask in the UK from a policy perspective is to get to at least 6 weeks at 100% pay, because that would like triple the amount of time and would radically equalize who can afford to take it, because people will be properly paid. So that's like the baseline objective in terms of policy. But then there's this second order objective, which is like, can we test and prove this hypothesis that yes, by running and winning this campaign, we can give an alternative portrayal of what it means to be a man in Britain today, and we can start to move that cultural conversation on in a positive rather than negative direction. So those are the two big things we're trying to do. And yeah, I can tell you a little bit more about like how, if that's where you want to go.
I mean, let's take those one after the other, because I am actually interested in sort of the level of provisions that there are. So comparing it to Germany, we have a situation now in place where you can take essentially 3 years of paternity leave between the two people in the marriage.
That was
In
3
total,
years, you said, right? Three.
well, that's not all paid, but your employer needs to take you back after 3 years. Cumulative, right? So for the both of you. So one person can take a year and a half and the other a year and a half or whatever. And then you get 12 months of pay if it's just one person taking it, and that's capped at 1,800 euros a month, I think. And then if both people take it, you can extend that to 14 months. And then I think the other thing in Germany is what is nice is essentially there's a right to daycare for every child that is 1 year or older, and you have and that's essentially free. I mean, it's not free. You still pay some for sort of food, and it also depends sort of on the region, but it's not a massive economic burden. Whereas my sister-in-law, she lives near London, and what they're paying for daycare is pretty ridiculous. So it does feel like this is also a situation where development has come very unevenly in different places, right? In a way, and I wouldn't say the situation in Germany, for example, is far from perfect, but in a way, you guys are catching up. And is that something that you find is effective to point to and say, look, guys, we're lagging behind. We're lagging behind sort of places like Sweden or Germany, but we're also lagging behind the average. Does that move the needle, or is the response then, those stupid Germans, the socialist utopia bullshit is going to crash when they, talk to the finance minister in 5 years? I don't know. Is that a strategic consideration?
It's helpful in two ways. Like tactically, yeah, sure, it's helpful to say we have the worst paternity leave in Europe, 40th out of 43 in the OECD. Now, that doesn't win the whole argument because, to your point, the UK has a kind of slightly lower tax burden than many European countries, so you'd expect it to have lower social spending. But on early years education, I think the UK spends about 1.5% of GDP. I think in Germany it's 2%. France is more like 3%. Scandinavia more like 3%. So I think, yeah, we spend less on and we get less out, and we have a slightly lower tax rate. So yeah, there is that broader context, but it's still helpful to say, look, we're like way behind our peer countries on this one. The other thing is like a strategic point, which is, I think in campaigning, you're trying to find issues that are winnable, issues where you can actually change an outcome. They say the successful generals are those that pick battles that are already won, except for the fighting. And so I think on the one hand, you're trying to find an area where you believe you can win, where the direction of travel is clear, but you're also trying to find something where, it's non-trivial, right? It's winnable, but it also has to be really substantial and worthwhile. And I think for us, this feels like a big fight to have. To win, it would cost £1.1 billion every year, going to 600,000 families. It's like a big ticket to go out and get. But we also believe it's going in the right direction, both because every other European country is doing it already better than we're doing, and because all of our polling shows that, yes, while we're right to be concerned that some men are falling out of love with gender equality, actually the vast majority of men are falling in love with being active dads. We are the most active generation of fathers there's ever been. 90% of British dads in every social group, in every part of the country, say they want to be a more active part of their child's life than their father before them. So yeah, it's both kind of a tactically useful thing to point to how far we are behind in our messaging, but it's also strategically significant because it's an indicator of where it's possible to win.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I do think it's really an issue that transcends the classical political divides, because obviously, it's just so universal that no matter where you stand in the political spectrum, you will have to contend with these issues, and that makes it, I think, quite useful and quite a good starting point for a conversation like this. And then, on the financial side of things, it's also, we're talking about just the total number of future taxpayers that we can expect to be there, right? And it's not a coincidence that, for example, while everybody's doing pretty badly in demographic terms, the French are very clearly doing better than we are, and there is an argument to be made that providing for this level of support, as they have been for a long time now already, has a big part to play here.
I think it's a complicated one. The Scandies are not doing amazingly on birth rates and have the best parental leave provision. So I don't think it's quite as simple as saying improve paternity leave, people have more babies. I do think making it easier for this generation of parents certainly will help. It's not going to hurt, and there's some evidence to suggest that it will help improve the birth rate. I actually think the critical economic argument is more about women's labour force participation, which is basically the caring patterns you get into in the early weeks and months after a child is born. Basically, if you're the one who's always changing the baby, then you know how to change the baby and you become super confident doing it. If you're never changing the baby and you don't know what to do, you tend to step back and be like, well, I'll let my partner do a bit more of this. And so that's how couples, even with like really egalitarian values, they can have a baby and very quickly find themselves like in the 1950s, right? Where one of them's really like the principal caregiver and the other ends up feeling like kind of locked out of that. And basically all the research shows that across Europe, wherever countries have introduced better paternity leave, you then have more balanced childcare responsibilities, not just from the start, but for the rest of that child's life. And with that, then women are free to make different professional choices. And so actually of the 1.15 billion I said it would cost to introduce 6 weeks of paternity leave in the UK, 80% of that would be repaid by increased tax contributions that women would be making over the life of their careers, and you would drive £2.6 billion of economic growth. So much to say, yes, I think there are economic arguments. Yes, I think there are demographic arguments. But I want to pull you back quickly to one of the political pieces you talked about, which is, yes, everyone who has kids, the question of whether they get any leave with them and any time with them is going to affect them. But I don't think it's quite the case that everyone is on board that dad should have more time. I actually do think, particularly the far right and the alt-right, they really are championing a vision of masculinity that is it's like the old school traditional masculine identity, but this time it's on steroids. You're meant to be ripped, you're meant to be rich, you're meant to be dominant. You're meant to have as many kids as you can, not so that you can be present in their lives, but so you have proof of your masculine credentials, right? It's another vanity metric. So I think what we're doing in our work is we're trying to create a vision of fatherhood that is premised on greater equality than that. And that way we think, yes, we can split off this vast coalition of men who do want to be active dads while actively challenging some of the political project to the far right that wants to say to these guys, no, you should be a type of man that actually wants to blame women for the struggles that you face.
Yeah, so I think that's a really, really important point. And we just went through quite a bit on the sort of the economic thinking, and you just really sort of introduced the alt-right masculinity side of it. I think we can dig into that a little bit more. In a sense, you've just really outlined what the kind of man that the far right kind of wants you to be, right? You're supposed to be ripped, you're supposed to be rich, you're supposed to be, all of these hyper successful things, but all of that is really just a cover for the fact that you can't get laid, for the fact that you can't actually be a functioning man anywhere in the real world off the internet. You can't meet women, you can't get women to like you. You probably feel and they probably feel you can't satisfy them. You don't really know how to be nice to a woman. You definitely, if you can get a date, it's probably via one of these apps. And even on these apps, you might get frustrated that you're not that successful. I mean, these are the things that are really at the heart of this. Let's face it. I mean, this is where a lot of this toxicity comes from. And this kind of frustration. I mean, it's the most normal kind of teenage frustrations that every 13 and 14-year-old sort of experiences at some point, in their puberty. And then you might grow out of it or you might not. And in this case, we've actually this set of people have actually turned it into a full-on fascist political agenda. And the earlier fascists did that to a degree. But then, how do you then essentially make this other mode of masculinity, this other mode of being a man, where you have been successful, you've been successful enough with women to have a child with one, at least, hopefully, and then, you want to take an active part of that, not because you're Mr. Nice Guy, but because that is the manly thing to do. That's sort of what I'm interested in, is how do we make the dad man, the healthy dad person, be more masculine and more appealing than this toxic fucking twisted mutant that the sort of Andrew Tates and Elon Musks and so on are putting out there, because they're the ones with the problem, really.
So I think there's quite a lot in what you've said. Starting at the beginning, I think, yes, there's definitely a generation of men who've grown up with the advent of online dating apps, and that has changed the experience of how you meet a partner. Lots of spaces where you would historically have done that have started to decline. And we entered into this quite adversarial dating paradigm. There was this like book called The Game that was written, you might have heard about, which was all about how you like get sex. And so dating became something that men increasingly saw through an adversarial lens, really about like the start of like 20 years ago as a shift, and started with our generation of men. I think what I would say though is it's more than that. I think, you know, I grew up in like a proud feminist household. My mum was a feminist documentary filmmaker. And I grew up as part of a kind of generation of boys who grew up seeing kind of repeated scandals of male violence, and particularly violence against women and children. You know, this kind of culminated in Me Too. And I think, you know, it bred a kind of silence. It bred a kind of slightly shamed silence about what it meant to be a man, where really, like, I was clear on what I should not be, right? Don't be part of the problem. Don't be a perpetrator. Don't be one of these assholes. But I grew up with very little positive proposition about what it meant to be a man. And so I think you've had this situation where for a couple of decades, basically decent, equality-minded men have been silent. And what's happened is in that context, toxic voices have come to fill the vacuum. Because there is a context where, while we have this silence, we also have some very real challenges that are facing men and boys. You know, in the UK, for instance, male wages have flatlined since the 1970s. Suicide is the highest killer, is the leading killer of men under the age of 50. If you're born poor, you are twice as likely to remain poor if you're a boy as if you're a girl. You know, men make up the vast majority of people in prisons. Like, there's a whole bunch of challenges that men and boys are facing. There's been a silence on behalf of progressives about what it means to be a man in the face of those challenges. And that's where we've left this vacuum for these awful voices to exploit. So I don't think it's just a case of like, oh, a lot of men are struggling to find a partner. They're being convinced that the way to do it is by becoming this like dominant alpha asshole, though I think that is all true. I think there's also this bigger picture of real challenges facing men and boys, a silence and a failure on behalf of progressives and Democrats to really engage with those issues because they've been afraid that to speak about boys and men means to be opposed to progress for women and girls. And I think what we're really trying to articulate at the Dad Shift is a clear like statement that like, no, equality is not zero sum. Actually, we need to like think about the issues facing men and boys, not least because healthy men and boys are really important for the success of women and girls. So to come back to your kind of question, Omri, on like what masculinity means and what that active fatherhood means, like when we started the campaign, I got loads of questions from journalists and politicians, which is like, hey, isn't this just an issue for like woke middle-class dads like you in East London? Are you saying that like the traditional vision of fatherhood is bad? You know, in the UK, and I don't know whether this is true for your context, but fatherhood has traditionally been defined by protecting and providing. And I was asked, are you trying to get rid of protect and provide? And I was like, no, I just want to hold it to a higher standard. At the Dad Shift, we believe in providing. It's really important that your kids have like food on the table and a roof over their heads. But we also think it's important to provide them with your presence. That's the thing they're going to value the most. We still believe in protecting, right? We think you should put up the stairgate. You should make sure you've got the right car seat. But we also believe that one of the most important ways you can protect your child, particularly your boy, is by role modeling what it means to be a healthy man in their life, in touch with themselves, in healthy relationship with your partner. So, we basically believe that, the dickheads online, these toxic influencers, they're trying to take the traditional masculine vision and make it less, right? We're trying to take it and make it more. We're trying to be a better man, be a happier, fuller, more ambitious man by being a kind of fuller vision of a father than this really empty vision that just says, yeah, you're a father just because you got a girl pregnant. Like, how embarrassing to take that as the yardstick by which you measure yourself as a dad.
Hi everyone, this is Ted from This Time Tomorrow. Creating a podcast that takes on the global rise of autocracy and far-right populism is hard and time-consuming work. But it's worth it because you're listening. If you're as concerned about the state of the world as we are, then please join Omri Price, Benjamin Zeb, and Daniela Vancic for weekly reports from the front lines against autocracy. Become a democracy defender. Join a cause or a party. Stand up for freedom and human dignity. Take action, 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 and hit subscribe. Share this podcast with a friend, or send us a message at tttpodmin@proton.me. Don't wait. Do it today. Your support means that we can reach more listeners and hopefully activate more people in the defense of democracy. Thank you so much for listening. That's all from me. Now, back to the episode.
I really like that because I think one quick reaction that some on the progressive side of things did have occasionally is to then sort of reject traditional male virtues in a way that I think is both not very smart and also strategically doesn't make a lot of sense. I think on the other hand, we need to really claim the aggressive alpha male type. It's perfectly fine to be sort of traditionally male. It's completely fine to have this idea of, this is a person who can hold their own in a fight, or who can run very fast, or whatever it is, right? Is good in a boxing match. But there's absolutely no contradiction here to also take up the hard job of caring for your family. And there's also if you have a huge problem with your wife earning more money than you do, or you have a huge problem with changing diapers and so on, there's just nothing particularly male about it. It's just a changing set of tasks that you have, and you better be good at all of them. And by the way, it's the same thing that we are asking of women. I mean, it's simply not the case anymore that women just get to sit around all day and feed babies and do the dishes. Almost none of the people who even hold these very traditional views of what a man is supposed to be can afford to live with a woman who just stays at home and takes care of the kids because they couldn't make rent, right? There's just an extra bit of tasks that modern life throws at us, and I don't think for a second that means you need to throw everything overboard that was good in the past. It's just the list is growing longer, and the challenges are changing slightly, and that's fair enough. And either you take it up or you blame somebody else for it. I think that's something that we need to make clear.
Yeah, and I think there is a strong bit here. So sorry, go ahead, George.
No, after you.
Sure. I think there is this whole question of modeling what it is a man should be. Benny and I were saying before, we need to reclaim Rambo, which is something that Benny just spoke to. I think if you look at all the sort of classical male heroes in mythology and stories and movies and books, like the real sort of macho men that protect and provide, one thing that they are not is they're not assholes, right? Like, I was just kind of thinking through all the different story. I mean, probably like the classic hero that we do see that maybe is a bit of an asshole, is maybe James Bond is a little bit of an asshole, but not too much, like, and none of these sort of Elon Musk, Andrew Tate type, Donald Trump type men that try and model some kind of version of masculinity, they're all just pathetic assholes at the end of the day. Like, they're just not a very good man in and of themselves, right? And I think we kind of need to highlight, obviously adjusting for some of the inherent misogyny that can come in with some of these like kind of classic male heroism. if we just adjust for that a bit, but then we need to sort of reestablish the man hero as something that young men can really look to in a positive way, but in a way that is also a feminist, you know, like if James Bond and Indiana Jones and these kinds of people could also be good feminists, then I think we've won in a way, you know?
Yeah, I think, those two jobs are both very important, right? We need a dividing line against the assholes. And there, for me, like, we say, look, there's nothing manly about playing the victim, about punching down, about breaking things you don't understand. So yeah, I think it's really important to like be able to call out like bad men and the way in which they're failing to be manly in their behaviors. There's nothing manly about like blaming your struggles on women. So that's one piece of the work. We need to work out like, why is it that those guys are failing, and not just like failing to like behave well, but failing on their own terms of trying to be a halfway decent man. So that's like one job. And then the other is, to your point, it's like, what's that positive vision? And I think that positive vision has to be about traditional masculinity reimagined rather than traditional masculinity thrown away, right? I'm super into the idea that I should aspire to be strong, and it's okay for boys and men to aspire to strength. And of course it's okay for women too. But like, the vision of strength we need needs to be strong enough to face the fact that you can't always do it on your own, and that sometimes you shouldn't try. We work a lot with Movember, and my friend Amy, who works there, she's like, I'm really into stoicism. Yeah, like the idea that you should be strong and silent. And stoicism has an amazing place, right? It's great if you're finishing a marathon. It's great if you just had a breakup and you need to like get yourself together. It's less good if you just found a lump on your testicle, right? Like, strong and silent, that's like not the way to approach something wrong with your body. No, go see a doctor. Like, the strong thing is to go and see your GP and say, give me some advice, I've seen this lump, right? So it's about like challenging us to be ambitious for that vision of masculinity, rather than just like accepting this like cheap knockoff that's being offered by these like idiots online.
Yeah, I think like this is really, really important, and how we operationalize that is crucial. Now, to really talk about how the campaign works, right? Like, what are you doing to engage people? What is your pressure point on decision makers? Like, if I join now, I mean, I saw you have these WhatsApp groups on your website and so on. Like, fire me up. How do I get involved? What does the campaign actually do to have an impact?
Well, let me give you strategy before I give you like opportunities to get involved. So our theory of change is really clear. Like, we think, in the UK, we have a Labour government with a large majority until 2029. Alex and I think that the Labour government will give us an improvement for paternity leave if three things are true. Number one, if we can make sure that business is kind of at least broadly supportive or not really opposed. The Labour government don't want to do something that will be portrayed as another attack on business. So one is we have to get kind of business broadly on side. Two is we have to make the economic growth case. In the UK, we have very anemic growth. There's not a lot of money to go around. We have to make it clear that investing in families is good for the country's bottom line. And then three is we have to prove that this is an issue that matters to ordinary working fathers across the country. In the UK, the political fight between Labour, Reform, the Conservatives is really, in large part, a fight over the votes of working class men. And we need to prove to Labour that this can be an effective dividing line against their political opposition, where they can be both pro-male and pro-equality. So those are three things. We think if those three things happen, then we win. So the way in which the Dad Shift tries to make those three things happen is through what we call campaign moments. Every 4 to 8 weeks, Alex and I will produce a moment. And what that looks like is some kind of new research that produces genuine, newsworthy findings. So we used a whole bunch of freedom of information requests, for instance, to find out how much money is spent on parental leave in the UK. It's £3.3 billion. And to find out how much of that goes to fathers. And it's less than 3%. So our kind of core piece is like one piece of research. The second piece is like some genuine political drama. So last summer, when we were doing that research, we worked with the Women and Equalities Select Committee in the UK Parliament, who ran an inquiry into paternity leave, and they issued a report calling for 6 weeks, 90% of pay within this Parliament. So you take a new piece of research that's genuinely newsworthy, some genuine political drama, and then you add in a piece of public action. So inspired by the Icelandic women's strike in the 70s, last summer we called the first ever dad strike. We called on dads to take an afternoon off work to come join our picket line at the Department of Business and Trade, and 1,000 fathers took the afternoon off to protest. And normally if you get 1,000 people to a demonstration, it is not national news, right? But if it's a strike and if it's dads, that's news. So you take new research, genuine political jeopardy, and a public action that can capture imagination. And what you drive is like a moment of national focus, where you get everyone talking about the issue. The issue is being converted into active political pressure, and you're landing your narrative frame, which is this is a system that's failing working fathers the worst. So yeah, Alex and I will do one of those every kind of 4 to 8 weeks. We now have about 50,000 supporters on our different channels, about 500 core activists on that WhatsApp community you mentioned earlier, and they will take part in those actions, that research, making it happen on a weekly basis.
That's really quite impressive, and it goes to show that if you have a very clear 1, 2, 3 in your campaign setup, then there's a lot that you can achieve. Where do you see your chances if you look at the next couple of months? What do you think is sort of a realistic time horizon? What are sort of the the relevant steps in the legislative agenda? How do you get this adopted?
So we had some progress following the dad strike and that last moment we did last summer. 2 weeks later, the UK government launched a review of parental leave. The Secretary of State launched it at the museum just 500 meters from my house. We were there, we helped him launch it. He adopted all of our core messages, all of our framing. In the Times newspaper, they ran a story saying how to take on misogyny, better paternity leave, and it was him launching this review. And in the photo, it's quite funny, I have it on my wall, there's 2 children in shot, and they're both mine. So we're off to a good start, right? We've got the government to launch this review, they've adopted our message positionings, we're in close. The review will run till the end of next year, so it's really long, and that sucks. But it's basically the government playing for time. They're hoping that the economy picks up, that there's a bit more headroom for them to operate. So I understand why they're going for a long review, but it's obviously quite difficult for us as campaigners to keep the salience of our issue high for a whole 18 months. But basically, the review should end at the end of 2026, which means 2027 is the year that we need to get legislation on this, and we need the actual law to change. I think we have maybe a 50-50 chance. We've got a 50-50 chance of winning that legislation, and we've got a 50-50 chance that it just ends up as a manifesto commitment. So the next general election in the UK will be 2029, and it's quite possible that Labour just goes into that with a manifesto commitment to improving paternity leave. And given the uncertainty of any next election, that's totally unsatisfactory. So yeah, we've got a big fight on our hands to the point we made in the earlier conversation. It's both winnable, but it's also losable. So yeah, we've got our work to do.
Yeah, no, indeed, that's a lot of work coming up. But then I worked in the European Parliament for a few years, and I covered the Gender Equality Committee there and saw some of this legislation, like the maternity leave directive, the carers directive, and so on, so parental leave and all of these things. And usually the pitfalls were always, very much in the details of the numbers, like the level of remuneration, the exact amount of time. It's not the overall concept, but the how much exactly. And then, the kind of the employers' organizations, the business associations, and so on, basically saying, sorry, as employers, we cannot, da 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 da. and then there's a bunch of sort of EU European considerations which don't apply for the UK. But I'm wondering, like, how do you engage with individual MPs? So individual sort of decision makers, maybe to be your champions, or if they're particularly vulnerable at this constituency or that constituency in the UK system. And how do you engage with like business associations and employer associations that end up, they're sort of great arbiters of whether or not this goes through, right? As a lobby group.
Uh-huh. So when we were starting, we launched by putting these dolls and slings on statues all around London and Edinburgh. There's like a lot of statues of like people who are famous in public life. Unfortunately, a very large majority of them are men. But very rarely are those figures kind of remembered as fathers. They're remembered as a footballer or a politician. Excuse me. They're very rarely remembered as dads. So we went out, we put these slings and dolls on them all over London and Edinburgh, and like caused this major, it really caught attention and got people talking. But at the same time, we needed something for people to do. So I drafted a letter to Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, from us as fathers to him as a father. And I wanted to check that the like tone of the letter was perfect, because it needed to be. It was our first public action. So I sent it to a guy called Josh Simons, who I know from previous campaigning, and he's a Labour MP now and a very influential kind of Starmerite. And I sent it to him and said, "What do you think?" And he was like, "Looks great. Can I sign it?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he was like, "Should I send it round the rest of the new intake?" That's like, in the last Parliament, Labour won this huge majority. There were hundreds of new Labour MPs. And he was suggesting send it round all of them. And I was like, yes. So he sent it round all of them. And in like 20 minutes, 30 of them had signed up. And I put them all into a WhatsApp group. So now we have a WhatsApp group. It's grown now. It's about like 40 MPs. And that's like our campaign engine room. We've got our like supporters, but we then have this core group of MPs who are really driving the campaign forward day to day. We work with about 90 MPs in total, including in other political parties. But I think as a campaigner, the key thing to think about is to treat politicians themselves as like actors and participants, or potential actors and participants in your campaign. So just as an organizer, you might be thinking, like, how do the members of this community or of this church, or how do the people in this Facebook group, how can we get them involved? It's the same way of thinking with MPs. Like, how do we create space for them to take action in ways that make sense for them, further their interests, while also furthering our cause? So that's like one side of the work, and is a big part of my focus. On the business side, I think, our analysis is that the associations are the ones that are going to do the majority of the interface with government. It's not going to be individual employers, it's going to be their associations. So then the question is, okay, how do you stop the associations from being like out and out negative about your proposed change? Oh, well, they're membership organizations, right? So what we need to do is split their membership. The more of their members who are supportive of improving paternity leave, the better. And the best way to do that is, well, there's a productivity case for improving paternity leave if you're an employer. There are 800 mostly very large, wealthy employers in the UK who already offer improved paternity leave because they know it's good for recruitment, good for retention, good for morale. So the more companies we can get doing that, the more it splits the coalition, the association's membership. And actually, then you can make an argument, because in the UK we have a system where it's actually the state that pays for parental leave. It's not the business. The business loses the person and they have to backfill them, but they don't have to pay their wages. So then you can say, well, actually what we need to do is we need government to step in to level the playing field so that all businesses can offer proper paternity leave, not just the wealthy ones. So yeah, that's basically our strategy. The more businesses we can get adopting enhanced leave, firstly, that splits the membership. And then secondly, we can make this argument about levelling up rather than levelling down provision. So yeah, that's our approach on both politicians and business.
That's great. So I really love that approach of having a WhatsApp group for MPs. That's a very powerful campaign tool, of course. And And so I'm just wondering, you have your sort of activist group of MPs, you have your outlined strategy for the stakeholders you need to engage in terms of the business associations and so on. If I sign up to your WhatsApp group as a supporter, what happens?
I mean, you'll start getting our emails, so you'll get an email once a week inviting you to take action in one way or another that will help drive forward the campaign, whether that's speaking to your own employer or writing to your member of parliament. And then, every 6 to 8 weeks, you'll be invited to take part in our next action. You know, the last one we did was we ran this competition. We say that paternity leave in the UK is a bad joke. And I hope this will work internationally, but in the UK, the dads are famous for loving bad jokes. I don't know if that's true in like the rest of the world, but like we call it a dad joke.
I think it's an international thing, yeah.
Great. So we say like the British paternity leave is a bad joke. Who loves bad jokes? Dads. So we ran this competition to try and find the UK's worst dad jokes. Like thousands of people sending in jokes, voting, saying, "Oh, that's the worst one." And so all of our supporters were invited to like submit jokes, get their friends and family to do the same. And then once we got the worst jokes, it was about calling your MP's office, speaking to your MP to get them to attend a debate where they all read the jokes out. So we had a debate in Parliament where all of these dozens of MPs opened with these terrible jokes before then saying, of course, the real joke is the country's paternity leave system. We need to sort it out. And I think, so with our moments, we try to be like quite creative. It might be that you do something like that. It might be that here let me show you. We were trying to think of a way to bring to life the fact that having a child is super expensive. And we were thinking like what represents to most people like a big unexpected cost. And we thought, parking tickets. You know when you park in the wrong place and you come back and you see a ticket on your car and you think, shit, like that's a lot of money that I wasn't planning on spending. Well, we got 10,000 parking tickets made that instead of saying, in the UK they normally say penalty charge notice, the one that I'm holding up says paternity charge notice. So we got like 10,000 parking tickets made up. And people on our WhatsApp community could say like, I want 50. And then you would go out in your local park, putting them on buggies, putting them on milk formula, on nappies, to show how, basically the cost of everything is going up and the paternity pay you're entitled to is still rock bottom. So our activists get to get involved in like fun activations like that help keep the noise up and frame things in terms of like this being important to working men.
That's awesome. And what's the likelihood of you being able, with all of this really creative and, politically impactful campaigning, to make sure that the Labour government actually uses their existing massive majority to pass legislation before the next election? Because it seems like an obvious opportunity to have a party that claims to have sort of progressive social views in power. What's the likelihood of Labour doing it?
I think it's 50-50. I think it's 50-50. Like, the UK is in a very difficult fiscal position. Increased borrowing does result in really serious punishment from the bond markets. So I think it is a real challenge for the government to spend any money at the moment. So I think we have our work cut out to prove that both this can grow the economy, this can win them votes, and this isn't going to be kind of opposed by businesses every step of the way. So I think it's a 50-50 chance, which means it's all to play for, right? It means we've got to get out there and do the work.
No, and then I think there's another consideration here, because what we have seen in past campaigns is that even if you fail getting it through now, it's very much also just about getting the idea plugged into the process. And then eventually, this becomes a matter of time rather than if it gets implemented. I think if you sort of get a lot of the basics sorted out, you do build, or you don't even have to build support for this, I suppose. You just need to show and prove that support for this is there and that the electorate actually wants this. And then at some point, once it's plugged into the process, it becomes inevitable. So I think in that sense, a lot of the work that needs to be done has probably already been done, but pushing to get this through now while the window of opportunity is there is obviously highly relevant, and it would give, I think,
Benny, you're
also
an
this
optimist.
Labour government. Yeah, I am an optimist. Yeah, I think it would give the Labour government also a chance to prove that they're useful in some respects. I mean, they must be, if they're not stupid, they must be looking for opportunities to take the initiative to prove to the electorate that they're in some way useful, that there's something new going on. And then in terms of costs, I mean, this certainly doesn't break the bank. So hopefully they will understand that.
Those are interesting points. I think there is a real challenge for Democrats, progressives, which is when in theory you have a progressive government, what does campaigning look like? What's your role in civil society? And I think we see our role as basically like creating space, changing the conversation, and kind of encouraging to create a context in which the government can win by doing what we want them to do. So yeah, I think we need to see and there's always that tension between how much do you want to push them and make life hard for them versus how much do you want to encourage them and open space. And I think at the moment our focus is principally we think they probably want to do this, so we need to make it viable. We need to open the space so that they can. And to your point, Benny, I agree, right? If you really elevate the issue, if you change the conversation, long term, this will come. But, every year that this doesn't change, 600,000 families are let down. It's a lot of people. So whether it happens in 1 year's time, 2 years' time, or 10 years' time, that's really meaningful, particularly because we know that proper paternity leave has this huge impact on attitudes around gender norms. Every time a European country improved paternity leave in the last 20 years, sexist stereotyping, sexist attitudes, drop linearly. You can watch them drop among the kids who are raised in more equal households. So yeah, there's both a really important human case for trying to win this as soon as possible. There's also a really important political case, which is we need to shift these attitudes if we're to stop the rise of the far right.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Yes, amen to that. And then I would just throw in at the end, I mean, there's probably a good economic case to be made also that when you pay people these amounts of money that they then go and spend, it's not like you're taking money and then sitting on it. Then the multiplier effect in the economy is probably pretty hefty as well. So you're probably making your money back at a significant rate. But in any case, yeah, that's
that's all just liquidity. This is going
stuff.
directly back to the bakery and the local grocers and so on. I mean, this is not money that will flow into some portfolio in Nevisons and Kits or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, George, this has been a really, really inspiring conversation. I think we've had a lot of stuff to really chew through, from the whole kind of masculinity debate to the practicalities of how to engage politicians. I think it would be really interesting to just keep this on the radar and then see how you guys progress over there and what campaigns there might be on the continent that we could compare notes with.
And I mean, congratulations! This is really quite the professional setup that you guys have managed to pull off here. I think engaging just a small amount of activists in a consistent way, so people actually still know what they need to do on a monthly basis. And then it's one thing to get a couple of MPs in a WhatsApp chat, but to kind of have them stick around and still understand that there's regular things that actually need doing and getting them to do stuff. That requires a lot of hard work and dedication. I think some of the examples you mentioned are also things to learn from. Like, how do you then actually get people to stay engaged and to do something? That example with the dad jokes, I think that's pretty fantastic, and it's not actually that easy. I think to build something like that. So well done, young man. Well done, Dad, I suppose.
Thank you so much, guys. It's been a real pleasure being on. Yeah, we'd love to stay involved in the conversation. I think particularly this stuff around like masculinity, like we're all figuring this out, right? And I think we would love to be learning with and from other movements around Europe. Particularly, you know, there's countries with like way better gender norms than the UK for sure, who we can learn a lot from. And there's also places where they're moving in a better direction faster. So yeah, would love to keep learning and chatting with you. And yeah, really appreciate that shout out. I think, you know, that piece around finding the right co-founder is absolutely foundational. You know, I'm very lucky to have Alex working with me, and really, like, I think we're also trying to find some new ways of like, how do you campaign while keeping it small? You know, like Alex does this 4 days a week. I do this as a volunteer on the side of my day job. And actually, in a way, not growing a big staff team means we don't have to spend all of our time fundraising. It means we don't have to spend all of our time managing. It means we can just like focus on the things we're pretty good at and keep it really tight. So yeah, thank you so much. And it's been great connecting with you today.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
And yeah, have a lovely afternoon now. Take care.
Amazing. Cheers, guys.